Hey there, and welcome to What's Going On, the podcast where we deep dive into life's greatest mysteries and stories. I'm your host, Maddy, and today I am unfortunately on my own as Amanda is very ill. This means we haven't had the chance to film our supernatural episode, and for this we do apologise, but these things can't be helped, and she is very, very ill, and we didn't think you'd want to listen to her sniffing and coughing down a microphone for an hour. Bless her. I hope she gets better soon. Next time we meet, though, we are going to record a double episode over 2 days. We're going to do the supernatural one, and then we're going to do one where we talk about our favourite horror movies, the fan theories behind them, and also some behind the scenes fun facts. But it is the spooky season, arguably the best time of the year, and we didn't want to leave you with nothing this week. So today I'm going to go solo, and I will be exploring the fascinating history of Halloween and how it evolved from ancient rituals into the celebration we know today. Then we'll be taking a chilling turn and dive into a couple of true crime stories that will definitely make you think twice about answering your door on Halloween night. So grab your favourite drink, settle in, and let's get started. Halloween is a holiday that we've all come to know and love, or fear, depending on how you feel about spooky costumes, haunted houses, and trick-or-treaters. But where did Halloween actually begin? To answer that, we need to travel back over 2,000 years to a time where the Celts, living in what is now Ireland, the UK, and northern France, celebrated a festival known as Samhain. The Celts marked their new year on November 1st, a day symbolising the end of the warmer, fruitful summer months and the start of a cold, dark winter. For the Celts, winter wasn't just tough, it was also a time they associated with death. On the night of October 31st, they believed that the boundary between the living and the dead blurred. They thought the spirits of the dead would return to the earth, causing mischief and sometimes damaging crops. But it wasn't all bad. The Celts also believed that the presence of these spirits allowed their priests, known as druids, to make predictions about the future. To commemorate the event, they built massive bonfires, offering sacrifices of crops and animals to their gods, and they wore costumes, usually made of animal heads and skins, as part of their celebration. But things changed when Christianity spread into Celtic lands around the 9th century. The Church, recognising the influence of Samhain, tried to blend it in with their own traditions. November 1st became All Saints' Day, or otherwise known as All Hallows' Day, a time to honour saints and martyrs, and this is believed to be the Church's attempt to replace the Celtic Festival of the Dead with a related Church-sanctioned holiday. The night before, the traditional night of Samhain, thus became All Hallows' Eve, eventually shortened to what we now call Halloween. Now, Halloween is known to be mostly huge in America, but how exactly did it get there? Well, it wasn't always so widespread in America. In fact, Halloween was pretty limited to colonial New England because of strict Protestant beliefs. But in places like Maryland and the southern colonies, where different European groups and even American Indian traditions mingled, a new, distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge. Back then, Halloween celebrations were known as play parties, events where people gathered to celebrate the harvest. They shared ghost stories, told each other's fortunes, danced, and played games. By the mid-19th century, these autumn celebrations were popular, but Halloween as we know it hadn't quite taken shape yet. This all changed with the wave of Irish immigrants in the 19th century, many of whom were fleeing the Irish potato famine. The Irish brought with them their Halloween traditions, including the practice of dressing up and going door to door asking for food or money, which evolved into the trick-or-treating we know today. By the late 1800s, there was a push to tone down the spooky aspects of Halloween. Communities started organising Halloween parties that focused more on family-friendly fun, games, costumes, and seasonal treats. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. And because of these efforts, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 20th century. However, that doesn't mean that Halloween is safe. Many murders and other horrific crimes happen around this time of year. Studies show that crimes, especially violent ones, spike on this night, with some estimates suggesting a 40 to 50% increase. it seems like the boundary between the living and the dead isn't the only thing that gets blurred on Halloween. Now, let's get into 2 real-life, chilling true crime stories that happened on Halloween. These tales will leave you questioning just how safe the holiday really is. So I'm starting with a story that revolves around something that's haunted the holiday for decades: poisoned Halloween candy. You know the warnings. Every year there's that lingering fear of tainted treats. And when I was younger, it was the classic needle in the mini chocolate bars, or I think the razors was a big thing when I was a kid. But how much of that is based on actual events, and how much of it is just urban legend? Well, I'm going to explore that, and I'm starting with one man who eventually became known as the real life candy man, and he made every parent's nightmare come true. Ronald O'Bryan was an optician from Deer Park, Texas, who lived with his wife and 2 children, Timothy and Elizabeth. On October 31st, 1974, O'Bryan took his kids trick-or-treating in Pasadena, Texas. O'Bryan claimed that during their rounds, one house didn't answer the door, but after catching up with the group, he pulled out 5 pixie sticks and gave them to the kids, including his son. Later that night, Timothy asked to try one of the pixie sticks and complained it tasted bitter, so O'Bryan gave him Kool-Aid to wash it down. Within minutes, Timothy was violently sick, convulsing and vomiting, and tragically passed away. It was later discovered that the pixie sticks he ate had been laced with a fatal dose of cyanide. The community was immediately terrified. Parents across the area turned in their children's candy to the police, fearing more was poisoned. According to a pathologist who tested the pixie sticks, the candy consumed by Timothy contained enough cyanide to kill 2 adults, while the other 4 candies contained enough to kill 3 to 4 adults. But the real shock came when the investigation pointed not toward a stranger, but back to Ronald O'Bryan himself. Police had grown suspicious of him already after discovering that none of the houses had given out pixie sticks, and that the house O'Bryan had claimed had given him the sweets was owned by a man named Courtney Melvin. Melvin was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect, as over 200 people confirmed he had been at work until 11 p.m. that night. Suspicion grew even more when they learned that O'Bryan was over $100,000 in debt, which is equivalent to about £47,607 and 89 pence in 2023. He had also taken out various life insurance policies on his children, and these totaled about $60,000, which is equivalent to around £285,658 and 14 pence in 2023. O'Bryan had even tried to buy cyanide shortly before Halloween, and although police could never actually prove where he purchased it, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and the police believed he had poisoned his children to collect on their life insurance policies. He was arrested and charged with capital murder and attempted murder for giving the poison candy to other children as well. Thankfully, none of them had consumed it, and this was believed that he did this to cover his crimes. During his trial, he maintained his innocence the whole time. But so many people testified against him, including a chemical supply salesman who O'Bryan had asked how to buy cyanide. In addition, friends and co-workers stated that in the months leading up to Timothy's death, O'Bryan had showed an unusual interest in cyanide and how much it would actually take to kill a person. O'Bryan's own wife also testified against him, stating that on that night it wasn't Timothy that had asked for the pixie stick, but it had been given it by his father. On June 3rd, 1975, a jury took only 46 minutes to find O'Bryan guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. In 1984, O'Bryan was executed by lethal injection. Now here's the thing. O'Bryan's case is unique, and it's probably one of the most infamous real-life stories of tainted Halloween candy. But despite this one horrifying story, there's little evidence that poisoned candy is an actual widespread danger. Sociologists have conducted extensive studies on what's been dubbed Halloween sadism, the idea that people intentionally harm children by tampering with Halloween candy. Their findings? The threat is grossly exaggerated, and they found that many of the reports were either overstated or unrelated to Halloween altogether. They suggest that fears of Halloween sadism rise during fearful times, like during the Tylenol poisonings in the 1980s, when cyanide-laced Tylenol was placed on store shelves. The crime did lead to the introduction of child-proof containers and tough federal laws aimed at punishing those who tamper with drugs. But these cases still remain unsolved, and the idea of tainted Halloween candy has spiked. But as sociologists point out, these fears tend to resurface in times of paranoia, and there's no documented instance of a stranger poisoning Halloween candy that's been consumed by a child. Take this case from 1990, for example. A 7-year-old girl collapsed while trick-or-treating in Santa Monica, California. The police immediately confiscated Halloween candy in the area, but it turned out she just had a heart murmur, unrelated to any candy she had eaten. There's many instances like this that have happened, but none of them trace back to the classic urban legend of poisoned candy. Now, I want to just end by briefly touching on how these fears have impacted Halloween itself. Because over the last decade or so, we've seen a rise in this thing called trunk or treating. It's mainly an American thing, I think. You don't really see it in the UK. But if you're not familiar with it, it's where parents drive to a designated location. They decorate their cars with Halloween themes, and kids go around from car to car collecting candy. The idea of this is that it's a more controlled, safer environment, and it can avoid these things like tainted Halloween candy and kids not being safe. But it's a really far cry from the traditional door-to-door trick-or-treating that so many of us grew up with. And I've got to say, it feels very sad to me. Because when I was a kid, Halloween was all about freedom. We would literally go out in the dark around the neighbourhoods unsupervised. And yeah, our parents would remind us to be careful, but it wasn't like today where so much of the fun seems overshadowed by fear. But let's face it, we're in a different world now and parents are more cautious. And the stories of people like Ronald O'Bryan have certainly left a mark. So is it justified? Maybe, but I still think there's room for that same Halloween magic we experienced as kids. A night where children can be children without the weight of urban legends and fear dragging them down. In this next story, I'm going to take you to the small, quiet community of Martin, Ohio, where the events of October 31st, 2010 would forever change the lives of one family and the town they lived in. This is the story of the Lisk family massacre, a case that left a community in shock and authorities grappling with one of the most horrific crime scenes they'd ever encountered, with one state prosecutor saying, "This was the most disturbing murder scene I'd ever seen over the course of my career, and I can still see it to this day." To the residents of Martin, Halloween was a time for tricks, treats, and costumes, not the horror that would unfold within the Lisk home. So how did a family celebration turn into tragedy, and how could so much darkness hide behind the walls of a seemingly normal home? It all started with a marriage. In 2001, William and Susan Lisk tied the knot, blending their families together. Susan had 2 sons, Devon and Derek, while William had a son of his own, William Jr., who went by the nickname BJ. Devon and Derek adapted well to their new family dynamic, but BJ struggled. His relationship with his stepmother Susan was fraught with tension and frequent arguments, putting William Sr. in the impossible position of having to choose between his son and his wife. This tension would ultimately build to a breaking point on Halloween morning, 2010, when the Lisk family home would become the scene of a gruesome and heartbreaking crime. That morning, Laurie Morse, William Sr.'s sister, called her nephew Derek, asking him to come over and help with some work. When Derek didn't answer, she tried calling Susan, but there was still no response. Worried, she reached out to Devon, who finally picked up. Devon had been out at a choir concert, but when he came home, the house felt wrong, too quiet for a Sunday afternoon. At first, Devon tried to brush it off. He figured his family was resting, so he went to his room to play video games. But as the day wore on and nobody else stirred in the house, he grew uneasy. It was weird for his parents to still be in bed at 1:30 in the afternoon, as they were both early birds. So that's when he decided to check on his mum and stepdad. He went into their room and found them lying in bed with the covers pulled over their heads as if they were still sleeping. But when Devon reached out to shake his mother awake, what he uncovered wasn't sleep at all. Pulling the covers down, he discovered something that no child should ever have to see. Both William and Susan Lisk had been brutally murdered. Shocked and terrified, Devon ran from the house screaming before finally calling his Aunt Laurie, barely able to speak through his panic. The police arrived quickly, securing the scene and beginning their investigation. It didn't take long to uncover the full extent of the horror. Blood was spattered over the walls. William Sr. had been shot multiple times in the head and face, and Susan had been both sexually assaulted and shot in the head. They lay side by side in bed, blood soaking through the sheets. The investigation then turned to Derek's room, where the door was locked from the inside. Police broke it down only to find Derek's lifeless body. He had been bludgeoned with a blunt object, curled up as if trying to protect himself from the killer's blows. Because there were two different methods used, investigators assumed that Derek was killed first, with perhaps a hammer, so that Bill and Susan wouldn't be woken up by any gunshots. All three family members were dead, but who had done it, and why? Investigators toyed with the idea of it being cult-related due to it being on Halloween, but quickly honed in on two main possibilities. Was Devon, the one who found the bodies, responsible for the massacre, or was there another killer inside the family home that night? The house showed no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen. Muddy footprints were found by the dock on the pond, and this was drained in the hopes of finding a weapon, but nothing was found. Investigators believe that the killer seemed to have known the layout of the house and been comfortable enough to tidy up afterwards, as no shell casings were found, and they also took the time to shut both bedroom doors, even locking Derek's. The lack of evidence made investigators turn to the only witness at that point, 16-year-old Devon Griffin. They found it odd that he would go straight to his room for 2 hours and not wonder where his family was, but as they continuously interviewed Devon, his alibi remained rock solid. He had been at his father's house the night before and returned briefly to pick up his choir robe before heading to a church concert the next morning. It seemed that Devon wasn't the culprit, but there was another person Devon mentioned seeing that morning, someone unexpected. B.J. Lisk, William Sr.'s troubled son, had spent the night at the house. He and his father had just returned from a week-long hunting trip at the family's cabin. Despite a rocky past with Susan and his stepbrothers, BJ had been invited to stay the night after a small gathering at the Lisk home. The documented issues with BJ began in 2004, when police were called after he struck his stepmother Susan with a coffee mug. 2 months later, he escalated the violence by punching her in the chest, and not long after, he stole her car keys and used them to attack her. Following one of these violent incidents, the police physically removed BJ from the house. He was subsequently admitted to a mental health facility where he stayed until his father stepped in and agreed to be his guardian. After that, BJ was no longer allowed to live in the family home, but William was determined to repair their relationship and keep the family together. This effort was part of the reason why he took BJ on the hunting trip that week, and why he let BJ stay over on the sofa after they had enjoyed a party together that night. And that's when everything unravelled. On that fateful morning, Devon recalled seeing BJ outside the house, putting something into his white truck before driving off. And when BJ left, he took with him more than just his belongings. He left behind 3 dead bodies and a trail of evidence pointing straight to him. A county-wide manhunt was launched. Police soon found BJ at the family cabin, where he was arrested without incident. Inside his truck and on his clothing, they found the blood and DNA of his father, stepmother, and stepbrother. The murder weapons, a .22 caliber rifle and a hammer, were recovered as well. BJ Lisk pled guilty to the murders to avoid the death penalty, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. But justice would be short-lived. In 2015, just 5 years after the murders, BJ, at the age of 29, took his own life in his prison cell, leaving behind more questions than answers and a shattered family. There's still many questions behind why BJ decided to murder his family, but most of the people around him, including himself, believed he was truly mentally ill. At his trial, BJ did make the following statement: "I loved my dad very much, and it makes me feel sick every time I think about what I did. I can't really explain why all of this had to happen, but I think most of all it had to do with my mental illness." After his death, one of his defense attorneys stated that he was not surprised he had committed suicide, stating, "He was obviously a disturbed human being, and facing the prospect of life without parole, it doesn't surprise me." In an interview for a TV show in 2022, Devon spoke about the tragedy that happened to his family, and also spoke about BJ. He said, "BJ wasn't a monster. We were trying our hardest to kind of help him, but we may not have had the necessary understanding to help him in the way he needed to be helped." Now, as far as I could find, Devon now lives happily with his wife, and he also has a son who they've named Derek after his brother. And I hope to God that he's living better now, because I personally couldn't imagine going through what he went through, and those images would haunt me for the rest of my life. So I really, really hope he's doing better now. But in the end, the Lisk family massacre is a chilling reminder of dark secrets that can fester beneath the surface of even the most normal-seeming households. Tensions that build and break, leading to tragic outcomes that ripple through communities and leave lasting scars. And that wraps up today's deep dive into the darker side of Halloween, from its ancient origins as a Celtic festival to the horrifying true crime cases like Ronald O'Bryan, the man who poisoned his own son on Halloween night, and the tragic Lisk family murders. We've seen how this holiday has been touched by both myth and modern horror. We hope this episode gave you a little more insight into the way history and real-life events can twist even our most beloved traditions. And if you have your own Halloween story, theory, or case you want us to explore or touch on next episode, feel free to reach out to us. We are What's Going On Instagram. Now stay safe this Halloween, watch out for tricks and the treats, and as always, stay curious, stay cautious, and stay spooky. Until next time, this is Maddy, signing off.